Elena's hands trembled as she paused the footage for the 13th time, the image frozen on her laptop screen like a photograph from someone else's nightmare. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., October 15th, 3 days ago, during the peak of the harvest moon. She sat in her cramped field station, a converted ranger cabin that smelled of pine sap and instant coffee, surrounded by maps marked with GPS coordinates and migration charts that suddenly seemed trivial. The creature's eyes reflected the camera's infrared flash like twin stars, luminous and intelligent. Its massive frame was covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb moonlight rather than reflect it, and its hands, God, they were hands, not paws, held Maya's with an impossible tenderness. Her daughter wore the same white hospital gown she'd been dressed in during Elena's last visit, but here it flowed like silk in the mountain breeze. Elena rubbed her eyes, dry from hours of staring at the screen. She'd been living in these mountains for 3 months, part of a University of Washington research grant studying the behavioral changes in the Cascade wolf population. The work had been a lifeline after the accident, a way to escape the antiseptic smell of hospitals and the weight of watching Maya's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. Her satellite phone buzzed against the wooden table, jarring her from the footage. The caller ID showed Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Seattle Children's Hospital. Elena, I know it's late, but I wanted to check in. You missed visiting hours again today. Elena's throat felt raw. I'm sorry, Pat. I got caught up in data analysis. How is she? The same. No changes in brain activity, but her vitals remain stable. Elena, you know I have to ask. Are you taking care of yourself up there? When's the last time you had a real meal? Through the cabin window, Elena could see the moon hanging like a pale wound in the star-drunk sky, the same moon that had illuminated her daughter's impossible dance. I'm fine. The research is going well. Better than expected, actually. A pause stretched across the static-filled connection. Your department called. They said you haven't submitted any data reports in 2 weeks. That's not like you. Elena minimized the video player, revealing dozens of other files scattered across her desktop. Cam030CT Turo 347.mp4, Cam07Oct140 223 mp4, Cam01015 247 mp4, each one containing footage that should have been scientifically impossible, each one showing Maya dancing with her lupine companion in various clearings throughout the forest. I've been recalibrating my equipment. Some of the cameras have been malfunctioning, recording corrupted data, false positives. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Elena. Dr. Hendricks's voice carried the careful tone she used when discussing difficult diagnoses. Grief doesn't follow a timeline. What happened to Maya wasn't your fault. Taking on this research project so soon after the accident, maybe you should consider coming back to Seattle for a while. Elena's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could delete the files, pack up her equipment, and return to her sterile apartment near the hospital. Resume her vigil beside Maya's bed, reading aloud from books her daughter couldn't hear, holding hands that never squeezed back. But then she looked at the paused video, at the joy radiating from Maya's face as she spun in the creature's arms, more alive than she'd been in months. I need to be here, Pat. There's something important happening with the wolf population. Something unprecedented. Wolves don't typically migrate through that region this time of year. Are you sure what you're seeing isn't... I know what I'm seeing. The words came out sharper than intended. Elena forced herself to breathe, to remember that Dr. Hendricks had been Maya's advocate since the accident, fighting insurance companies and treatment protocols with the fervor of a guardian angel. I'm sorry, it's just... This could change everything we know about their behavioral patterns. I need more time. The silence stretched until Elena wondered if the call had dropped. Then Dr. Hendricks sighed. 2 weeks, Elena. If you haven't produced tangible research results by then, I'm driving up there myself to drag you back to civilization, and I want daily check-ins. After the call ended, Elena opened the video player again. This time she focused not on the creature, but on Maya's face. Her daughter's eyes sparkled with an awareness that had been absent since the hiking accident that shattered her skull against granite rocks. In the hospital, Maya's expression held the blank serenity of deep sleep. But here, in this impossible footage, she radiated consciousness, purpose, even happiness. Elena pulled up a new browser window and typed Native American Legends, Washington State Wolf Spirits. Her academic training screamed warnings about confirmation bias and magical thinking, but her mother's instincts whispered something else entirely. Maya was trying to tell her something. The question was whether Elena had the courage to listen. Outside, the October wind rattled the cabin's windows like skeletal fingers, and somewhere, in the darkness, a wolf howled, long, mournful, and entirely too close. Elena's eyes burned as she stared at the search results populating her laptop screen. Academic articles about indigenous folklore mixed with conspiracy theory websites and cryptozoology forums. The rational part of her mind, the part that had earned a PhD in wildlife biology, that had published 37 peer-reviewed papers, recoiled from what she was doing. But her finger kept scrolling. The wolf's howl had faded into the night, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Elena rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar ache that had become her constant companion since Maya's accident 6 months ago. Before the research grant, her days had followed a rigid pattern: hospital at dawn, sitting beside Maya's bed until visiting hours ended, then home to her empty apartment, where she'd stare at photo albums until sleep finally claimed her. This isolated cabin had been meant as an escape from that suffocating routine. The University of Washington's offer to study wolf migration patterns in the Cascades had seemed like divine intervention, a chance to lose herself in work while maintaining the illusion of productivity. Her colleagues at the university understood grief, or at least they pretended to. Department head Dr. Marcus Webb had personally approved her sabbatical, his weathered face creased with sympathy as he'd signed the paperwork. "Take all the time you need, Elena," he'd said. "The wolves will still be there when you're ready." But he'd expected data, progress reports, the kind of meticulous documentation that had built her reputation as one of the Northwest's leading wildlife biologists. Instead, she had 18 video files that would end her career the moment anyone else saw them. Elena closed the browser and walked to the cabin's small kitchen, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. The refrigerator hummed in the darkness, its contents a testament to her deteriorating self-care: expired yogurt, a half-eaten sandwich from 3 days ago, and bottles of water that had become her primary sustenance. Dr. Hendricks was right to worry. Elena had lost 15 pounds since arriving at the research site, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that had once been softly rounded. She poured herself a glass of water and caught her reflection in the blackened window. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a neat ponytail, hung in tangles around her shoulders. The laugh lines that had once framed her brown eyes had deepened into something harder, more desperate. At 45, she'd thought she understood loss. Her marriage to David had ended 2 years ago in a quiet dissolution of accumulated grievances and growing distance. But losing Maya had been different. Losing Maya had been like having her heart extracted while she was still conscious. The satellite phone buzzed again. Elena glanced at the display, expecting Dr. Hendricks calling back with more concerns, but the number was unfamiliar. She let it go to voicemail, then immediately regretted her cowardice. What if it was about Maya? What if something had changed? She played the message with trembling fingers. "Dr. Vasquez, this is David. I called the hospital today to check on Maya, and they said you haven't been in for 3 days. I know things are complicated between us, but Maya is still my daughter too. Could you please call me back?" Elena set the phone down without deleting the message. David had visited Maya exactly twice since the accident. Brief, uncomfortable encounters where he'd stood at the foot of the hospital bed, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. He'd remarried 6 months after their divorce, a 28-year-old dental hygienist named Carly, who posted inspirational quotes on social media, and had never experienced a day of genuine hardship in her perfectly curated life. Maya had been devastated by the divorce, though she'd hidden it behind teenage bravado and cutting remarks about her father's midlife crisis. The hiking accident had happened on Maya's 18th birthday. They'd been celebrating her acceptance to college, just the two of them tackling the familiar trail they'd hiked dozens of times when Maya was younger. It should have been safe. It should have been a mother-daughter bonding experience before Maya left for university. Instead, it had become the moment that split Elena's life into before and after. Elena returned to her laptop, where the paused video still glowed like an accusation. Maya's face radiated joy as she moved in perfect synchronization with the creature. Her daughter had always been a dancer, ballet lessons from age 5 through high school, moving with a grace that Elena envied. Even in the impossible footage, Maya's movements held that same fluid elegance, as if dancing with wolf-like creatures under the full moon was the most natural thing in the world. Elena's phone chimed with a text from Dr. Webb. Status update needed a SAP grant committee asking questions. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on preliminary findings promising. Need more observation time. Outside, another howl echoed through the valley. Closer this time. Elena closed the laptop and listened to the wild sound that seemed to carry all the longing and loss she'd been trying to escape. Something was happening in these mountains. Something that connected to Maya, to the part of her daughter that existed beyond the broken shell lying in the hospital bed. The question was whether Elena could trust her own desperate hope, or if she was finally losing her mind. The howl cut through Elena's thoughts like a blade. So close she could swear she felt the vibration through the cabin walls. She moved to the window, pressing her face against the cold glass, and her breath caught in her throat. There, at the edge of the moonlit clearing 30 yards from her cabin, stood a figure in white. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she fumbled for her binoculars. The figure stood perfectly still, arms at its sides, face turned toward the cabin. Even from this distance, even in the uncertain moonlight, the posture was unmistakably familiar. The slight tilt of the head, the way the left shoulder sat fractionally higher than the right, a quirk Maya had inherited from Elena's own mother. "No," Elena whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But the figure raised one hand in a gesture that made Elena's knees buckle. A small wave, fingers waggling in the exact way Maya had greeted her mother every day after school since she was 7 years old. The same wave Elena had been desperately hoping to see again from the hospital bed that held her daughter's unresponsive body. Elena's laptop chimed behind her, an incoming video call. She spun around, seeing Dr. Hendricks' number on the screen, and when she turned back to the window, the figure was gone. The clearing stood empty except for shadows and moonlight. "Elena? Thank God you answered." Dr. Hendricks' voice filled the cabin, tinged with an urgency that made Elena's stomach drop. "I need you to sit down." "What's wrong? Is it Maya?" Elena's voice came out as a croak. Elena, something's happened. About 20 minutes ago, Maya's brain activity spiked. Not just a little. We're talking about patterns we haven't seen since before the accident." Her eyes opened for almost 3 minutes and Dr. Hendricks paused, and Elena could hear papers rustling. "She spoke, Elena. She said your name." The cabin tilted around Elena. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the wood. "She spoke?" Clear as day. She said, "Mama," and then something that sounded like dancing. The neurologist on duty ran a full battery of tests, but by the time they finished, she'd returned to her previous state. "Elena, I need you to come back to Seattle. Tonight." Maya's brain is showing activity in regions that have been dormant for months. This could be the beginning of real recovery. Elena's gaze drifted to her laptop screen, where the paused video still showed Maya's radiant face. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. from 3 days ago. She pulled up her research logs, scrolling through her meticulous notes about moon phases and wildlife observation windows. Her hands trembled as she cross-referenced the times. Every video had been recorded during peak hours of lunar brightness. Every image of Maya dancing had coincided with hospital reports of unusual brain activity that the doctors had dismissed as meaningless fluctuations. "Elena, are you there? She's been trying to tell me something." The words slipped out before Elena could stop them. "What do you mean?" Elena stared out at the empty clearing, then at the impossible footage on her screen. Maya hadn't just been dancing with the creature. She'd been looking directly into the trail camera during several sequences, as if she knew her mother would be watching, as if she was trying to communicate something vital. "I need to stay here, Pat, just for tonight. I need to verify something." "Absolutely not. Elena, your daughter may be waking up. This could be our only window." "The moon." Elena cut her off, opening her astronomy app. "Tonight is the new moon. No moonlight. If I'm right, if what I think is happening is actually happening, then tonight will prove it. Maya won't appear without the moonlight." "Elena, you're not making sense. Maya didn't appear anywhere. She's here, in the hospital, and she needs her mother. She needs me to understand what she's trying to show me." Elena's voice grew stronger, conviction replacing fear. "Give me until dawn. If I'm wrong, if nothing happens tonight, I'll pack up and drive straight to Seattle. But if I'm right—" She trailed off, unable to voice the impossible hope blooming in her chest. Dr. Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, grief can create very convincing hallucinations. The mind will do anything to avoid accepting devastating loss. Please don't chase shadows while your daughter needs you." 24 hours, Elena said. "Just give me until tomorrow night's moonrise." The silence stretched until Elena wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Dr. Hendricks sighed. "If you're not here by tomorrow evening, I'm calling search and rescue. And Elena, if Maya speaks again, I'm calling you immediately, whether you want to hear it or not." After the call ended, Elena stood alone in the cabin, facing the choice that would determine everything. She could pack her equipment, drive back to Seattle, and return to her vigil beside Maya's bed. Or she could trust that her daughter was somehow reaching across an impossible divide, using moonlight and an ancient creature as messengers. Outside, the forest waited in darkness, holding its secrets close. Elena remained frozen by the window long after Dr. Hendricks's call ended, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. The clearing beyond lay empty under the starless sky, but the image of that familiar figure in white burned behind her eyelids. Maya's wave. That specific, precious gesture she'd treasured for 18 years. Grief can create very convincing hallucinations. Dr. Hendricks's words echoed in the silence. Elena pressed her palms against her temples, trying to separate desperate hope from scientific observation. She was a biologist, trained to distinguish between correlation and causation, between wishful thinking and empirical evidence. But the timestamps didn't lie. The brain activity spikes aligned perfectly with her impossible footage. Her satellite phone sat on the table like an accusation. David's voicemail waited, along with 2 new messages from Dr. Webb demanding research updates. Elena stared at the device, knowing she should call the hospital, should demand to speak with Maya's neurologist about the sudden spike in brain activity. Instead, she found herself paralyzed by a fear she couldn't name. What if she was wrong about the moonlight connection? What if tonight's darkness proved her theory was nothing more than a mother's desperate delusion? The possibility felt more terrifying than facing the creature again. At least the videos had given her hope. Without them, she'd be left with nothing but the antiseptic reality of hospital corridors and the mechanical rhythm of Maya's ventilator. Elena's laptop screen had gone dark, but she could feel the presence of those 18 video files like a weight in her chest, each one a piece of evidence that would destroy her professional credibility if anyone else saw them. Dr. Webb would have her committed for psychological evaluation. The grant committee would demand their funding back. Her colleagues would whisper about poor Dr. Vasquez, how grief had finally broken her brilliant mind. But Maya had spoken tonight. For the first time in 6 months, her daughter had said "Mama" and dancing. Elena moved to the kitchen, her movements mechanical and disconnected. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to David's number, then set it down without calling. What would she tell him? that their daughter might be projecting her spirit into the Cascade Mountains to dance with cryptozoological creatures, that she'd chosen to investigate impossible videos instead of rushing to Maya's bedside when brain activity had finally resumed. The rational choice was obvious. Pack up, drive through the night, arrive at the hospital by dawn, hold Maya's hand and wait for those brown eyes to open again. Be the mother her daughter needed instead of chasing shadows in the wilderness. But something held her back, a conviction that felt deeper than logic or scientific training. Maya had been trying to communicate something specific in those videos. The way she'd looked directly into the trail cameras, the deliberate positioning in clearings that would provide optimal footage, even the timing during peak lunar brightness. If Elena left now, she might miss the only opportunity to understand what her daughter was desperately trying to tell her. Elena opened her laptop and stared at the research folder containing her legitimate wildlife data. 43 days of actual wolf observation had produced standard migration patterns, typical pack behavior, nothing remotely groundbreaking. The kind of mundane data that would satisfy the grant committee while advancing scientific knowledge by incremental degrees, safe, publishable, career-preserving. She created a new document titled Progress Report, Wolf Migration Study, and began typing the kind of clinical observations that had defined her professional life for 2 decades. Temperature fluctuations, prey availability assessments, territorial marking patterns. The familiar rhythm of academic writing should have been comforting, but every sentence felt like a betrayal of what she'd actually witnessed. Outside, the forest remained tomb-silent. No howls, no rustling vegetation, nothing to suggest the presence of impossible creatures or displaced spirits. The new moon had stolen all the magic from the landscape, leaving behind only ordinary darkness and Elena's growing doubt. Her phone buzzed with another call from Dr. Webb. This time she answered. "Elena, thank Christ. I've been trying to reach you for hours." The grant committee met in emergency session today. They're threatening to pull funding if you don't produce preliminary findings by Friday. Elena's throat felt lined with sand. "I understand, Marcus. I just need a few more days to compile." "They want raw data, Elena. Camera footage, GPS tracking logs, whatever you've collected. Send me everything tonight and I'll present it as work in progress. We can spin this as extensive preliminary observation, but they need to see tangible results." Elena stared at her desktop folder containing the impossible videos. Send them to Dr. Webb and her career would end within hours. Refuse, and she'd lose the research grant that gave her legal access to the forest where Maya was appearing. "I'll have something to you by morning," she heard herself say. After Webb hung up, Elena sat in the gathering darkness, facing a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Below lay professional ruin and the admission that grief had finally conquered her rational mind. Behind lay the safe path back to her former life, where loss was manageable and hope stayed within acceptable boundaries. But somewhere in the darkness ahead, Maya was waiting. Elena stared at her reflection in the laptop screen for a long moment after the call ended, seeing a stranger's hollow eyes staring back. The safe choice beckoned: gather the legitimate wolf footage, sanitize the data, send Dr. Webb enough material to satisfy the committee. Return to Seattle, to Maya's bedside, to the predictable rhythm of medical consultations and false hope measured in brainwave fluctuations. Instead, she opened the folder containing the impossible videos. Her finger hovered over the delete key. One click would erase all evidence of her descent into delusion. She could convince herself that grief had created elaborate hallucinations, that the timestamps were coincidental, that Maya's sudden brain activity was unrelated to creatures that couldn't exist. It would be so easy to choose sanity over the terrifying possibility that something beyond her understanding was reaching across the veil between life and whatever came after. But Maya had looked directly into those cameras. Maya had waved. Elena's hands trembled as she created a new folder titled Personal Files and began copying the videos. If she was going to commit professional suicide, she'd do it with intention. No half measures, no retreat into comfortable denial. She opened her email and began typing. Marcus, I need to request an extension on the preliminary findings. Something significant has emerged in my research that requires additional verification. I understand the committee's concerns, but rushing to publish incomplete data could compromise the integrity of discoveries that might challenge our fundamental understanding of. She deleted the draft. Started again. Marcus, I can't send the footage yet. I need more time. Delete. Marcus. The cursor blinked accusingly. How did you tell your mentor that you'd abandoned scientific method for the desperate hope that your catatonic daughter was somehow dancing with impossible creatures in moonlit clearings? How did you explain that every principle of rational inquiry had collapsed under the weight of a mother's love? Elena closed the laptop and walked to the cabin's supply closet. Her hiking gear hung in neat rows, the tools of a woman who'd spent her career pursuing answers in the wilderness. She pulled on thermal layers, wool socks, her heaviest boots. The familiar ritual of preparing for fieldwork steadied her hands. Outside, the night air bit through her jacket like a living thing. Without moonlight, the forest felt fundamentally different, not mysterious but simply dark, empty of the luminous possibility that had drawn her deeper into obsession. Elena shouldered her pack, checking that her night vision camera and emergency beacon were secure. She was going to find the clearing where Maya had danced. The trail leading into the deeper forest was treacherous in absolute darkness, but Elena had memorized every root and stone during 43 days of methodical observation. Her headlamp carved a narrow tunnel through the blackness as she climbed steadily upward, following GPS coordinates burned into her memory. Each step carried her further from the safety of academic respectability, from the careful boundaries that had defined her life. Behind her lay the cabin with its satellite internet connection to the civilized world, where Dr. Webb waited for data that would preserve her funding, and Dr. Hendricks monitored Maya's vital signs with increasing concern. Ahead lay only uncertainty and the growing conviction that some truths couldn't be captured in peer-reviewed journals. Her satellite phone buzzed in her pocket. Another call she chose not to answer. The device felt heavy with the weight of abandoned responsibilities, but Elena kept climbing. The forest pressed close around her, full of sounds that might have been wind through pine needles or something far stranger moving just beyond the reach of her light. At the first creek crossing, Elena paused to check her bearings. According to her GPS, she was still 2 miles from the clearing where most of the videos had been recorded, 2 miles from the place where Maya had last appeared, radiant with impossible joy. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness behind her. Elena froze, listening to the silence that followed. Her rational mind catalogued possible explanations. A deer disturbed by her passage, deadfall settling under its own weight, the normal sounds of a forest ecosystem continuing its ancient cycles. But something deeper than logic whispered that she was no longer alone. She turned off her headlamp and waited for her eyes to adjust. The darkness so complete it felt solid against her skin. Gradually, shapes began to emerge from the blackness. The skeletal outline of trees, the slightly lighter patch of sky visible through the canopy. And there, perhaps 50 yards down the trail she'd just climbed, a pale figure stood motionless among the shadows. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Even without moonlight, even in the new moon's absolute darkness, she could see the familiar silhouette. Maya stood at the edge of the lamplight's reach, no longer waving but simply waiting. "I'm coming," Elena whispered to the darkness. She switched her headlamp back on and continued up the trail, no longer walking away from her old life, but towards something that defied every certainty she'd ever held. Behind her, the pale figure followed at a distance, a silent guide leading her mother deeper into the unknown. There was no turning back now. The pale figure maintained its distance as Elena climbed, always at the very edge of her headlamp's reach. When she paused to catch her breath or check her GPS, it stopped. When she resumed walking, it followed with that achingly familiar gait. Maya's slightly pigeon-toed step, the way her left shoulder dipped when she was tired, details no hallucination should know. Elena forced herself to maintain a steady pace despite every maternal instinct screaming at her to run toward her daughter. Some primal understanding warned her that the rules governing this encounter were fragile, that moving too fast or calling out might shatter whatever bridge connected them across the impossible divide. The trail grew steeper as she approached. The coordinates burned into her memory. Her lungs worked harder in the thin mountain air, and sweat dampened her thermal layers despite the October cold. Behind her, the pale figure moved with effortless grace, unaffected by terrain that left Elena struggling for breath. At the second creek crossing, Elena stopped abruptly. Another presence waited ahead, massive and still among the Douglas firs. Her headlamp beam couldn't penetrate the darkness enough to reveal details, but she felt the weight of ancient eyes studying her approach. The creature from her videos, the impossible wolf thing that had danced with Maya under the full moon. Fear and wonder warred in her chest. Every evolutionary instinct demanded retreat from a predator that shouldn't exist. But Maya's presence behind her felt like protection, like permission to continue into territory where human understanding broke down. Elena took a careful step forward. The massive shape shifted slightly, and she caught a glimpse of silver-gray fur and intelligent yellow eyes that reflected her light like mirrors. The creature stood upright, easily 8 feet tall, with the powerful build of something designed for both beauty and terrible efficiency. But it made no aggressive moves, simply watched her approach with patient curiosity. "You know her," Elena whispered to the darkness. It wasn't a question. The creature's ears, distinctly wolf-like but proportioned for its enormous skull, twitched at the sound of her voice. When it spoke, the words emerged as a low rumble that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her bones. "She calls to you." Elena's knees nearly buckled. The voice carried the weight of centuries, of winter storms and spring rivers, of every wild thing that had ever run beneath these stars. But underneath the inhuman cadence, she heard something like kindness. "I don't understand what's happening to her," Elena said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "She's in a hospital in Seattle, but she's also here. How is that possible?" The creature tilted its massive head, studying her with those unsettling yellow eyes. "Understanding is not always necessary for truth. Your kind builds walls between the seen and unseen, but some souls refuse containment." Elena's scientific training rebelled against the non-answer, but another part of her, the part that had spent 43 nights watching impossible footage, recognized the deeper logic. Maya had always been stubborn, even as a child. If any spirit could refuse to be bound by the conventional rules of life and death, it would be her daughter's. Is she dying? The question escaped before Elena could stop it. "She stands at the threshold," the creature replied. "Neither fully here nor fully there. The moon calls to those caught between worlds, offers them form and freedom for brief moments. But such gifts come with costs." A chill ran down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the October air. "What kind of costs?" The creature's expression grew somber. Each dance draws her further from the path that leads back to flesh. She knows this. Still she comes, seeking to show you truths that words cannot carry. Elena turned to look back at the pale figure following in her wake. Maya stood motionless among the shadows, close enough now that Elena could see her face clearly. It was definitely her daughter. The same dark eyes, the same small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. But something in her expression had changed, acquired a depth that spoke of journeys into territories no 18-year-old should know. "What does she want me to understand?" Elena asked. "That love transcends the boundaries your kind accepts," the creature said. "That some bonds cannot be broken by injury or distance or the silence of dreaming minds. She dances to prove that she remains, that part of her will always answer when you call." Elena's throat tightened with unshed tears. "But if each dance pulls her further away, then you must choose," the creature finished gently. "Between the mother who holds vigil beside sleeping flesh and the mother who learns to love what her daughter has become." The weight of that choice settled on Elena's shoulders like a physical burden. Behind her, Maya waited with infinite patience. Ahead, the creature stood guard over truths that would reshape everything she thought she knew about life, death, and the persistence of love across impossible distances. In the darkness between them, Elena began to understand that her real journey was just beginning. The silence stretched between them like a held breath, heavy with implications Elena wasn't ready to face. She stood frozen in the triangle formed by her daughter's spirit, an impossible creature, and her own trembling certainty that whatever choice she made would irrevocably alter everything that came after. "I need to see where she dances," Elena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The creature's massive head nodded slowly. "The sacred ground lies ahead. But know this, to witness the full truth requires more than observation. It demands participation." Elena's scientific mind recoiled at the suggestion. Participation meant abandoning the last pretense of objectivity, crossing from researcher into something unnameable. But Maya had been waiting for her mother to understand, and understanding apparently required more than hidden cameras and clinical distance. "What kind of participation?" "The kind that transforms the observer," the creature replied, already turning to lead her deeper into the forest. "Follow, Dr. Vasquez. Your daughter grows impatient." Elena glanced back once more at Maya's pale figure, noting how her daughter's expression had shifted from patient waiting to something resembling urgency. The look she used to get before thunderstorms, as if she could sense atmospheric pressure changes that escaped everyone else's notice. The trail ahead wound through increasingly ancient forest, where Douglas firs gave way to cedar giants that predated European settlement. Elena's headlamp beam seemed diminished here, swallowed by darkness that felt almost sentient. Her GPS device flickered erratically, the display shifting between coordinates that placed her miles apart within seconds. "Technology fails in places where older rules govern," the creature explained without turning around. "Your instruments cannot map territories that exist partially outside your understanding of space." Elena's phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. Dr. Webb again, probably followed by Dr. Hendricks with updates about Maya's condition. Each unanswered call felt like another bridge burning behind her, another step away from the rational world that had once seemed solid and comprehensible. But Maya's presence at her back made retreat impossible. The creature moved with surprising grace for something so massive, navigating the treacherous terrain with an intimacy that spoke of centuries spent walking these paths. Elena struggled to keep pace, her breathing ragged in the thin air, her legs burning from the relentless climb. Behind her, Maya's spirit followed with that same effortless movement she'd displayed in the videos, unencumbered by the physical limitations that bound her sleeping body to a hospital bed 200 miles away. After what felt like hours but could have been minutes, time itself seemed negotiable in this space between worlds. They emerged into a circular clearing Elena recognized from her trail camera footage. But seeing it with her own eyes revealed details the cameras had missed. Ancient symbols carved into the surrounding trees, so weathered by time that they seemed part of the bark itself. A ring of stones that formed a perfect circle despite decades of weather that should have shifted them. And underlying it all, a sense of profound sanctity that made Elena's skin prickle with awareness. "This is where she comes to remember what it means to have form," the creature said, settling onto its haunches at the clearing's edge, where the barrier between flesh and spirit grows thin enough for crossing. Elena stepped into the circle and immediately felt the change. The air here hummed with potential, charged like the moments before lightning strikes. Her headlamp flickered and died, but somehow she could still see, not clearly but with a strange peripheral vision that revealed more than direct sight ever could. Maya moved past her into the center of the clearing, and for the first time since the impossible encounter began, she spoke. "Mama." Her voice carried the same ethereal quality as the creature's, but underneath Elena heard her little girl asking for one more bedtime story, her teenager explaining why curfews were fundamentally unfair. "You have to choose soon." "Choose what, baby?" Elena's voice cracked on the endearment. "Whether you trust me enough to let go." Maya's form seemed to shimmer in the strange half-light. "The doctors want to do things to my body," procedures that might bring me back but would close the door on this, on us being together like this. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Dr. Hendricks had mentioned experimental treatments, surgical interventions that carried enormous risks but might restore consciousness. She'd put off authorizing them, telling herself she needed more information. Now she understood her hesitation had deeper roots. If I say no to the surgery, then I stay lost between worlds, neither fully alive nor properly dead. It's not fair to ask you to choose. Maya's smile carried infinite sadness. But I need you to know that I'm not lost. I'm just exploring. The weight of decision pressed against Elena's chest like a physical thing. Save her daughter's body and possibly lose this impossible connection forever, or preserve the magic and watch Maya drift further into territories no mother should have to navigate alone. In the darkness surrounding the clearing, Elena sensed other presences gathering, drawn by the convergence of love and desperation and choices that would reshape the boundaries between possible and impossible. The real test was about to begin. The gathering presences emerged from the forest's depths, like memories taking shape. Elena watched in breathless terror as they materialized at the clearing's edge, dozens of figures caught in the same ethereal state as Maya. Men, women, children of all ages, their forms translucent but unmistakably human. Each face bore the same expression of patient waiting, as if they had been standing vigil for centuries. The other dancers, the creature rumbled softly, all who have chosen the threshold over final departure. Elena's legs trembled as the full magnitude of her situation crystallized. This wasn't just about Maya's unique condition. It was about joining a community of spirits who had refused the finality of death, who existed in this liminal space between worlds. Her daughter wasn't lost. She was part of something ancient and vast and terrifyingly beautiful. "How many?" Elena whispered. "As many as there have been souls unwilling to release their hold on love," the creature replied. The Salish called them bone dancers, but the phenomenon predates all human naming. Some bonds transcend the boundaries your kind accepts as absolute. Maya stepped forward, her luminous form drawing the other spirits closer. They formed concentric circles around her, a constellation of the in-between, and Elena finally understood what she was witnessing. This wasn't supernatural theater for her benefit. It was an invitation. "Dance with us, Mama." Maya extended her hand, and Elena could swear she felt warmth radiating from those translucent fingers. "Let me show you what I've learned about letting go without leaving." Elena's scientific mind screamed warnings. Participating would mean complete abandonment of rational thought, acceptance of phenomena that violated every natural law she'd spent her career studying. But as she stared into her daughter's familiar eyes that held depths no 18-year-old should possess, those concerns seemed increasingly irrelevant. Her phone buzzed again. Through the fabric of her jacket, she could feel the device's insistent vibration. Dr. Hendricks calling about surgical consent forms, Dr. Webb demanding explanations for her absence, the entire academic world pulling her back towards safety and sanity. Elena reached into her pocket and powered the phone off. The silence that followed felt like stepping off a cliff. "If I dance with you," Elena said, her voice steadier than she'd expected, "what happens to your body in Seattle?" Maya's expression grew infinitely sad. "The machines will keep it breathing. But every moment I spend here makes it harder to find my way back to flesh. Eventually, I'll have to choose, become fully spirit, or return to a body that might never truly wake. And if you choose to stay here, then I join the eternal dance. I become like them." Maya gestured to the gathered spirits, whose faces held a serenity Elena had never seen among the living. Not dead, but not alive in any way your world recognizes. The weight of that reality pressed against Elena's chest. This was her greatest fear made manifest. Not just losing Maya to death, which would at least have finality, but losing her to something incomprehensible, a state that offered connection but no hope of genuine return. Yet as she watched the spirits begin to move in slow, graceful circles around the clearing, Elena felt something unexpected rising in her chest, wonder. They were beautiful, these dancers caught between worlds. They moved with a freedom that transcended physical limitation, their forms flowing like water given consciousness, and Maya was radiant among them, more vibrantly herself than she'd been even before the accident. This wasn't diminishment, it was transformation into something larger than human understanding typically allowed. "The choice isn't really mine to make," Elena said suddenly, the truth hitting her with crystalline clarity. "It's yours. It's always been yours." Maya's smile could have lit the entire forest. "I was waiting for you to see that, but you wanted me here. You needed me to understand something. I needed you to see that love doesn't require possession," Maya said, beginning to move in the ancient pattern Elena had observed through her cameras, that holding on and letting go can be the same thing. The other dancers joined Maya's rhythm, their movements creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to bend space itself. Elena stood at the clearing's center, surrounded by impossible beauty, feeling her daughter's love wash over her like warm tide. This was what Maya had been trying to show her through 43 nights of patient dancing, that some connections transcend the boundaries of life and death, flesh and spirit, possible and impossible. Elena took a tentative step forward, then another. The movement felt natural, as if her body remembered rhythms older than conscious memory. Around her, the dancers welcomed her into their eternal circle, and for the first time since Maya's accident, Elena felt the crushing weight of maternal responsibility begin to transform into something else entirely. This was the ordeal Maya had led her toward, not a test of strength or determination, but of trust. Trust that love could survive any transformation, cross any boundary, endure any separation. Elena began to dance. Elena moved with the spirits for what felt like hours, her body following rhythms that seemed encoded in her very bones. The dance transcended physical motion. It was communion, conversation, a wordless dialogue between mother and daughter that spoke truths no language could carry. Maya's luminous form spun beside her, and for these precious moments, Elena felt complete for the first time in 6 months. Then the creature's voice shattered the sacred silence like thunder. "They come." Elena stumbled, the spell broken, as harsh white light suddenly flooded the clearing. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead, and through the trees came the unmistakable sounds of a search and rescue operation, boots crashing through underbrush, voices shouting coordinates, the mechanical whine of tracking equipment. "Dr. Vasquez!" The amplified voice cut through the forest like a blade. "This is search and rescue. We have your location. Stay where you are." Elena spun toward Maya, but her daughter's form was already fading, the other spirits dissolving like mist before sunrise. The sacred circle crumbled as spotlight swept across the clearing, transforming the mystical space back into ordinary forest with brutal efficiency. "No!" Elena lunged toward where Maya had been standing. "I'm not ready. I don't understand what you need me to—" But Maya was gone. They were all gone. Even the ancient creature had vanished, leaving Elena alone in a circle of stones that now looked like nothing more than random geological debris. The carved symbols on the surrounding trees appeared to be ordinary bark patterns. Her trail cameras hung dead and empty on their straps. The first rescue worker burst into the clearing, a young woman in Forest Service gear whose radio crackled with status updates. Behind her came others, including Dr. Webb, whose face cycled through relief and fury as he spotted Elena standing disheveled in the center of what appeared to be a ritualistic stone circle. "Elena, thank God." Webb rushed toward her, his academic composure cracking. "We've been searching for 8 hours. Your phone went dead. Your GPS tracker stopped transmitting. What the hell are you doing out here?" 8 hours. Elena's mind reeled. It had felt like minutes since she'd entered the sacred space. "I was researching, following the migration patterns. At night, alone, without backup equipment." Webb's voice rose with each question. "And what's this?" He gestured at the scattered trail cameras, their memory cards missing or corrupted. "Your entire data collection is destroyed, Elena. 43 days of research. Gone." The words hit her like physical blows. Elena grabbed the nearest camera with trembling hands, checking the display screen. Nothing. She tried another, completely dead. The third showed only static when she attempted playback. Every piece of evidence that might have validated her experience had been wiped clean. "The videos," she whispered. "They were all here. Maya dancing, the other spirits." "Maya?" Dr. Webb's expression shifted from anger to concern. "Elena, Maya is in Seattle. She's been in a coma for 6 months. Dr. Hendricks has been calling you repeatedly about surgical consent forms that need immediate—" "She was here." Elena's voice broke as she spun around the clearing, searching desperately for any trace of what she'd witnessed. "She was dancing with them. I saw her, I touched her, we spoke." The rescue workers exchanged meaningful glances. Elena saw herself through their eyes, a middle-aged woman standing alone in the wilderness, claiming to have seen her comatose daughter dancing with spirits, her professional equipment destroyed, her research obliterated. She looked insane. She sounded insane. Webb's radio crackled to life. "Dr. Webb, this is Seattle Children's Hospital. We've been trying to reach Dr. Vasquez. Maya's condition has deteriorated significantly in the past 8 hours. We need surgical authorization immediately, or we may lose her entirely." The words struck Elena like a death sentence. While she'd been dancing with spirits, believing she was connecting with her daughter's essence, Maya's physical body had been dying. The choice she'd thought she was making, between conventional medicine and mystical connection, had been made for her by her own absence. "We need immediate transport to Seattle," Webb said into the radio, his voice grim. "Dr. Vasquez will authorize whatever procedures are necessary." Elena wanted to protest, to explain that Maya had been trying to tell her something important about choice and letting go and love that transcended boundaries. But as she looked around the clearing, now nothing more than an ordinary forest space littered with broken equipment, the words died in her throat. The sacred space was gone. The spirits were gone. Maya was gone. All that remained was a mother who had abandoned her dying daughter to chase impossible dreams in the wilderness, destroying her professional credibility and possibly any chance of saving the only thing that truly mattered. As the rescue team led her toward their vehicles, Elena realized she had lost everything: her research, her reputation, her connection to Maya's spirit, and quite possibly Maya herself. The helicopter lifted them into the night sky, carrying Elena back toward a reality where daughters died in hospital beds while their mothers danced with delusions in empty forests. The helicopter's interior was a sterile metallic womb that vibrated with a rhythm of rotating blades, but Elena barely noticed the mechanical thunder. She pressed her face against the small window, watching the Cascade Mountains shrink beneath them as they flew toward Seattle. The forest that had moments ago pulsed with impossible life now looked ordinary from this height, just dark trees stretching endlessly under starlight, holding no more mystery than any wilderness viewed from above. But something was wrong with the stars. Elena blinked hard, certain exhaustion was playing tricks with her vision. Then she looked again, and her breath caught. The constellation directly above them, Ursa Major, the Great Bear, was moving. Not the slow celestial drift of normal stellar motion, but actual movement, the 7 bright stars shifting position like dancers in an eternal circle. "Dr. Webb," she whispered, but when she turned toward him, the words died. Webb sat across from her, reviewing medical files on his tablet, completely absorbed in the documentation of Maya's deteriorating condition. His face held the same focused concern it always had. Nothing suggested he saw anything unusual about the night sky. Elena looked back toward the window. The stars had returned to their fixed positions. Her hands trembled as the realization struck her with devastating clarity. She hadn't imagined everything in the forest. She hadn't suffered a psychotic break or succumbed to maternal desperation. The spirits were real. The dancing was real. Maya's presence had been real. But the connection worked both ways. She could see into their world because part of her now existed there too. The revelation should have been triumphant, validation of her impossible experience. Instead, it filled her with ice-cold terror. Because if she could see the spirits, if she was becoming like them, what did that mean for her ability to help Maya in the physical world? What did it mean for her own tether to reality? Webb's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Elena, we need to discuss the surgical options. Dr. Hendricks will meet us at the hospital, but you need to understand what we're facing. She forced herself to focus on his words as he explained intracranial pressure, experimental procedures, success rates that hovered in single digits. Each medical term felt like another door closing between her and the world where Maya danced free from the constraints of damaged neural pathways. The window for intervention is closing, Webb continued. Every hour of delay reduces the chances of meaningful recovery. But Elena barely heard him. Through the helicopter's window, she could see Seattle's lights spreading before them like a terrestrial mirror of the stars above. And moving among those lights, visible only in her peripheral vision, were figures dancing, translucent forms spinning between skyscrapers, their movements perfectly synchronized with the rhythm she'd learned in the forest clearing. They were everywhere. The realization hit her with stunning force. The spirits weren't confined to ancient woods and mystical clearings. They existed alongside the living world, separated only by perception, by the boundaries most people accepted as absolute. Maya hadn't been lost in some distant supernatural realm. She'd been dancing through the streets of Seattle, visiting art galleries and coffee shops and the university campus where Elena taught, experiencing a freedom her comatose body couldn't provide. She's been here all along, Elena whispered. What? Webb looked up from his tablet. Elena's mind raced through 6 months of guilt and helplessness. 6 months of believing Maya was trapped in darkness while machines kept her body functioning. But Maya hadn't been trapped. She'd been exploring, learning, growing in ways that transcended physical limitation. The dancing wasn't escape from her condition. It was transformation beyond it. The choice, Elena said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. She's been trying to show me the choice isn't between life and death. Webb frowned. Elena, you're not making sense. The medication, stress. It's between control and trust. Elena turned from the window to face him fully, between holding on and letting go, between loving someone enough to save them and loving them enough to let them choose their own path. The helicopter began its descent toward Harborview Medical Center's helipad, but Elena felt like she was ascending, finally seeing the situation from the proper altitude. Maya's spirit dancing in the forest hadn't been her dying. It had been her living in a way that physical recovery might never allow. And Elena's desperate attempts to bring her back weren't love, they were fear disguised as devotion. Through the window, she caught one last glimpse of the dancing figures moving between Seattle's buildings. Among them, for just an instant, she saw Maya spinning with perfect grace along the waterfront, her luminous form reflecting in Elliott Bay like moonlight on water. Elena closed her eyes and made her choice. Tell Dr. Hendricks I want to see Maya before any procedures, she said quietly. I need to ask her permission. Webb stared at her as if she'd spoken in an unknown language. But Elena felt calmer than she had in months, finally understanding that the greatest act of maternal love might be learning when to step back and let her daughter dance. The helicopter touched down on the hospital's helipad with mechanical precision, but Elena felt as though she were landing in an entirely different world than the one she'd left 8 hours ago. As the rotors wound down and medical personnel rushed toward them, she remained seated, watching through the window as orderlies wheeled a gurney across the concrete landing pad. Just ordinary people doing ordinary jobs, unaware that spirits danced in the spaces between their movements. Dr. Webb was already unbuckling his harness, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with Dr. Hendricks. Yes, she's here. No, I think she's... Processing the stress differently than expected. Give us 10 minutes. Elena finally moved, her legs unsteady as they transferred her to a wheelchair. Standard protocol for medical evacuations, Webb explained, though she suspected it had more to do with her mental state than physical injury. As they rolled through the hospital corridors, she found herself studying every corner, every reflection in the polished floors. searching for glimpses of the parallel world she now knew existed alongside this one. Dr. Sarah Hendricks met them outside the ICU, her expression carefully neutral. Elena had worked with Sarah for years, had collaborated on wildlife health assessments and shared coffee during medical conferences. Now she could see the concern in her colleague's eyes, not just for Maya, but for Elena herself. "How long do we have?" Elena asked. Cutting through the pleasantries, she could see Sarah preparing. Her intracranial pressure spiked dramatically around midnight. "We've stabilized it temporarily, but..." Sarah glanced at her tablet. "Without surgical intervention in the next few hours, we're looking at irreversible brain death." The clinical terminology should have devastated Elena. Instead, she found herself wondering what brain death meant in a world where consciousness could dance free from neural constraints. She kept the thought to herself, recognizing that sharing such ideas would only reinforce concerns about her mental stability. "I want to see her first," Elena said. "Alone." Sarah and Webb exchanged glances, the kind of professional communication that spoke volumes about their assessment of Elena's current state. "Of course," Sarah said carefully. "But Elena, we really can't delay much longer. The surgical window..." 10 minutes, Elena said. "Then we'll discuss options." They led her to Maya's room, and Elena steeled herself for the sight she'd avoided for weeks. The machines surrounding her daughter's bed seemed louder than she remembered, their electronic rhythms creating a technological symphony that felt almost aggressive after the organic silence of the forest. Maya's physical form looked smaller than ever, diminished by the tubes and wires that tethered her to artificial life. But as Elena settled into the bedside chair, she began to notice other things. Maya's hair had grown longer during her coma, and someone, probably her night nurse, Carla, had braided it with small wooden beads. Her fingernails showed traces of clear polish. These were the touches of people who saw Maya as more than just a collection of vital signs, who treated her with the dignity of someone still present. Elena reached for Maya's hand, and immediately felt the familiar warmth she'd experienced in the forest clearing. Not the clinical coolness she'd expected, but genuine heat radiating from her daughter's palm. Maya's body wasn't an empty shell, it was an anchor point, a home base that her spirit returned to, even as it explored impossible realms. "I understand now," Elena whispered, stroking Maya's fingers. "You've been trying to show me that letting go doesn't mean abandoning you. It means trusting you to choose your own path." For a moment, Elena could swear she felt Maya squeeze her hand. The monitors showed no change, heartbeat steady, brain activity minimal, but the connection was unmistakable. Maya was listening. "I don't know what's possible anymore," Elena continued. 6 months ago, I would have said spirits dancing in forests was pure fantasy. But I danced with you, baby. I felt your joy, your freedom. And I realized that what I've been calling love has really been fear. Fear of losing you, fear of being alone, fear of accepting that some things are beyond my control. Outside the room, Elena could hear Webb and Sarah discussing surgical protocols, their voices carrying the urgency of medical professionals fighting against time. But inside this space, Elena felt the strange calm that had settled over her in the helicopter expanding into something larger. Not resignation, but clarity. She understood now what Maya had been trying to teach her through 43 nights of patient dancing. Love wasn't about holding on or letting go. It was about trusting the other person to make their own choices, even when those choices led to places the lover couldn't follow. Elena squeezed Maya's hand one final time, then stood and walked toward the door. She had a conversation to have with Sarah and Webb, decisions to make about surgical interventions and quality of life measures, but for the first time in 6 months, Elena felt like she was acting from love, rather than fear. Whatever came next, she would face it as Maya's mother, not Maya's captor. Elena stepped into the hallway where Webb and Sarah waited, their faces a mixture of professional concern and barely concealed urgency. The fluorescent lighting felt harsh after the dimmed softness of Maya's room, and Elena found herself momentarily disoriented by the transition from the intimate space where she'd finally understood her daughter's message to this clinical corridor, where decisions carried the weight of life and death. "Elena," Sarah began, her voice gentle but firm, "we need to discuss the surgical options now. The longer we wait—" "I know." Elena's voice carried a steadiness that surprised even her. "But first, I need you both to understand something. What I experienced in the forest wasn't a breakdown. It was real." Webb's expression tightened. "Elena, the stress of Maya's condition, combined with isolation and sleep deprivation—" "I'm not asking you to believe in spirits, Marcus." Elena met his gaze directly. "I'm asking you to believe in choice, Maya's choice." She could see Sarah processing this, her medical training warring with years of friendship. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that for 6 months, I've been making decisions based on what I needed, rather than what Maya needed. I convinced myself it was love, but it was control disguised as devotion." Elena's voice grew stronger as the clarity that had settled over her in Maya's room expanded into resolve. "The surgery you're proposing, what are the realistic outcomes?" Sarah glanced at her tablet, then back at Elena. "Best case scenario, we reduce the intracranial pressure and she stabilizes. But Elena, the likelihood of her regaining consciousness, of meaningful recovery—" She paused. "The damage is extensive. We're looking at severe cognitive impairment, possible paralysis, requiring full-time care for the remainder of her life. And if we don't operate, she dies, probably within the next 6 to 8 hours. Elena felt the weight of the choice settling around her like the forest silence she'd experienced hours ago. In the distance, she could hear the ordinary sounds of a hospital at night, nurses making rounds, monitors beeping, the soft conversations of families keeping vigil. But underneath those sounds, almost at the edge of perception, she caught something else, a rhythm that reminded her of drumbeats, of ancient ceremonies, of dancing feet moving in eternal circles. "There's a third option," Elena said quietly. "We ask Maya." Webb stepped forward, his frustration evident. "Elena, Maya can't—" "She can't speak. She can't move. But she's still here." Elena turned toward Maya's room, then back to her colleagues. "I know how that sounds to you both. I know what my behavior tonight suggests about my mental state. But I'm going to make a request that might sound even more unreasonable." Sarah folded her arms, her expression carefully neutral. "What kind of request?" "I want to stay with Maya tonight. No surgery, no interventions, just time. If her condition deteriorates to the point where intervention becomes impossible, then we'll know we have our answer. But if she stabilizes, if she shows any sign of awareness or choice—" Elena paused, knowing how her next words would sound. "Then we'll know she's choosing to stay." The silence that followed felt charged with professional tension. Elena could see Webb and Sarah exchanging glances, weighing their legal obligations against their personal relationships with her. She was asking them to risk a malpractice lawsuit, to go against their medical training, to trust in possibilities that contradicted everything their education had taught them. "Elena," Sarah said finally, "what you're describing isn't medicine. It's faith. Maybe that's what's been missing." Elena felt the weight of her destroyed research, her obliterated professional reputation, her 43 nights of desperate searching for scientific explanations to mystical experiences. Maybe some things can't be quantified or controlled or solved with surgical intervention. Webb's radio crackled to life, a reminder of the outside world that had been searching for Elena while she danced with spirits. "Dr. Webb, this is Base Camp. Any update on Dr. Vasquez's condition? The university administration is requesting a full report." Elena realized with stunning clarity that her choices tonight would determine more than Maya's fate. Her reputation, her career, her entire identity as a rational scientist hung in the balance. The footage that might have validated her experiences was gone. The colleagues who respected her work would read reports of her erratic behavior, her claims of supernatural encounters, her abandonment of dying daughter to chase delusions in the forest. But as she stood in that sterile hallway, surrounded by the machinery and protocols of modern medicine, Elena felt the same certainty that had settled over her, during those impossible moments of dancing with Maya's spirit. Some truths transcended professional consequences. "I'm going back to Maya's room," she said, her voice carrying a finality that surprised all three of them. "Whatever happens next, it happens with me beside her, respecting her choice rather than imposing my own." She turned away from Webb and Sarah, toward Maya's room, and whatever revelation the remaining hours of night might bring. Elena crossed the threshold into Maya's room, and immediately felt the atmosphere shift around her. The machines continued their electronic symphony, but underneath their mechanical rhythms, she sensed something deeper, a presence that had nothing to do with the medical equipment sustaining her daughter's body. She settled into the bedside chair and placed her hand on Maya's arm, feeling again that impossible warmth. "I'm here, baby, and I'm finally ready to listen." For several minutes, nothing changed. The monitors displayed their steady patterns, Maya's breathing remained mechanically assisted, and the fluorescent lights hummed their sterile tune. But Elena waited with the patience she'd learned in the forest, understanding that some communications required stillness rather than urgency. Then, gradually, she became aware of a shift in the room's energy. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, taking on substance and movement. The reflection in the window began to show more than just the hospital room. Elena caught glimpses of trees swaying in moonlight, of figures moving in graceful patterns beyond the glass. Maya's hand grew warmer under her touch. "Show me," Elena whispered. "Show me what you need me to understand." The room around her began to blur at the edges, reality becoming fluid in a way that no longer frightened her. She found herself standing not in the ICU, but in a vast space that existed somewhere between the forest clearing and the hospital room. Maya stood before her, radiant and whole, her spirit form more vivid than Elena had ever seen it. "Mom." Maya's voice carried all the love and wisdom Elena remembered, but touched with something new, an understanding that transcended her 19 years. "You finally stopped trying to save me long enough to see me." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. "I was so afraid of losing you that I couldn't see you were still here. Just different. Not different. More." Maya moved closer, and Elena could feel the vitality radiating from her daughter's spirit. "The accident didn't trap me, Mom. It freed me to exist in ways I never imagined possible. But I've been waiting for you to understand that freedom isn't abandonment." Around them, other figures began to materialize, the bone dancers Elena had first glimpsed in the forest. They moved in their eternal patterns, but now Elena could see them clearly, not harbingers of death, but shepherds of transformation, guides who helped souls navigate the spaces between worlds. "The choice isn't whether to let me go," Maya continued. "It's whether to trust me to choose my own path, even when that path leads somewhere you can't follow." Elena felt the weight of 6 months of desperate control, of medical interventions driven by her inability to accept that love sometimes meant stepping back. "What if I choose wrong? What if I fail you?" Maya smiled with infinite compassion. "You've already made the right choice by asking me instead of deciding for me. But, Mom, there's something else you need to know." The space around them shifted again, and Elena saw herself from Maya's perspective, not just as she was now, but as she had been throughout their months of separation. Maya had been present for every bedside vigil, every tear Elena had shed in hospital corridors, every moment of maternal anguish. But she had also witnessed Elena's strength, her refusal to abandon hope, her fierce love that had ultimately led her to the forest clearing. "You think you failed me by holding on too tight," Maya said, "but your love is what kept me anchored enough to make this choice. Without that connection, I would have drifted away completely months ago." Elena understood then that her vigil hadn't been pointless. It had been essential. Maya needed the stability of her physical form and the constancy of Elena's love as anchor points while she explored realms beyond ordinary perception. The machines, the medical interventions, even Elena's desperate attempts at control had all served a purpose. They had given Maya time to discover what existence meant beyond the boundaries of flesh and bone. "So what happens now?" Elena asked. "Now you trust me to know what I need," Maya replied. "And I trust you to support whatever choice feels right, even if it means letting my spirit dance free while my body finds peace." The vision began to fade, reality reasserting itself around Elena's physical form in the hospital chair. But the clarity remained. Maya had been teaching her that true love wasn't about holding on or letting go. It was about creating space for the other person to choose their own relationship with existence, even when that relationship transcended conventional understanding. Elena looked down at Maya's peaceful face, understanding finally that whatever decision emerged from the next few hours, it would come from them together. Not from Elena's fear or the medical establishment's protocols, but from the deep communication that existed between mother and daughter across all boundaries. She squeezed Maya's hand and felt an unmistakable response. Not just warmth, but presence, consciousness, love. The final test had begun, but Elena was no longer facing it alone. The response in Maya's hand wasn't Elena's imagination. As she sat in the mechanical embrace of the ICU, she felt her daughter's fingers tighten around hers with deliberate intention. The monitors showed no change, but Elena's entire being registered the communication flowing between them, a conversation that existed beyond the reach of medical instruments. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in immediately, bathing the room in red emergency lighting, but Elena barely noticed, because in the darkness, Maya's eyes had opened. Not the vacant stare of neural reflex that Elena had witnessed months ago, but the clear, knowing gaze of her daughter, present, aware, and utterly transformed. "Hello, Mom." Maya's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried through the room with supernatural clarity despite the breathing tube that should have made speech impossible. "Are you ready?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she gripped Maya's hand tighter. This was the confrontation she had been building toward through 43 nights of searching, not with an external enemy, but with the fundamental nature of reality itself. Everything she had believed about life, death, and the boundaries between worlds was about to be challenged in ways that would leave no room for doubt or denial. "Ready for what, baby?" Maya's eyes reflected the red emergency lighting like pools of ancient knowing. "To see what I've really been trying to show you, to understand why the Bone Dancers chose me." The room began to shift around them, the walls becoming permeable, the ceiling dissolving into star-filled sky. But unlike her previous visions, this transformation felt aggressively real. The hospital equipment remained, creating a surreal fusion of medical technology and primordial wilderness. Elena could smell pine needles and hear the distant sound of drums, but she could also hear Maya's heart monitor continuing its steady rhythm. From the shadows beyond the dissolved walls, figures emerged. The Bone Dancers moved with their impossible grace, but now Elena could see them clearly. Ancient guardians caught between worlds, neither fully alive nor completely dead. Their leader, the massive wolf-like being she had first seen in her trail camera footage, approached Maya's bed with ceremonial reverence. "No." Elena stood, positioning herself between the creature and her daughter. 6 months of helplessness crystallized into fierce protective fury. "You can't have her. I won't let you take her." The being regarded Elena with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. When it spoke, its voice resonated with the power of wind through old growth forests. "We do not take, we offer. The choice has always been hers. She's 19 years old. She doesn't understand what she's choosing." Maya's laughter filled the room. Not the laugh of a teenager, but something deeper, touched with knowledge that made Elena's breath catch. "Mom, I understand better than I ever did before the accident. I've seen what exists beyond the veil. I've danced in realms where consciousness isn't trapped in failing flesh." Elena whirled to face her daughter, seeing Maya sitting upright in her hospital bed despite the tubes and wires, her eyes blazing with unnatural vitality. "You're asking me to watch you die. I'm asking you to watch me choose." Maya extended her hand toward the lead Bone Dancer, and Elena saw the creature's massive paw reach out to meet her fingers. For months, I've existed between worlds because I was waiting for you to understand that some transformations require witnesses. People who love us enough to honor our choices even when those choices break their hearts. The truth hit Elena with devastating force. This confrontation wasn't about saving Maya from supernatural forces, it was about Elena confronting her own desperate need to control the uncontrollable. The Bone Dancers weren't her enemy. Her enemy was her own inability to accept that love sometimes meant stepping aside and allowing the beloved to choose their own path even when that path led beyond the boundaries of ordinary existence. "If you do this," Elena whispered, her voice breaking, "I lose you forever." Maya's expression softened with infinite compassion. "No, Mom. If I do this, you gain something much more precious than possession of my physical form. You gain the knowledge that our connection transcends death, transcends the limitations of flesh and bone." She paused, her eyes holding Elena's with unwavering love. "But only if you can witness my choice without trying to stop it." The hospital room pulsed around them, reality flickering between medical sterility and ancient forest ceremony. Elena realized that the next few moments would determine not just Maya's fate, but the fundamental nature of who Elena would become. She could fight the Bone Dancers, cling to medical intervention, refuse to accept anything beyond conventional understanding. Or she could step into the terrifying space of ultimate trust, honoring her daughter's agency even as it led to unthinkable loss. Elena looked at Maya's radiant face, then at the patient, eternal figures surrounding them. Her deepest fear wasn't losing her daughter. It was discovering that true love required letting go of everything she thought she knew about life itself. The final choice was hers. Elena's world collapsed into a single moment of impossible clarity. Everything she had fought for, everything she had refused to accept, crystallized into one devastating truth. The choice was never hers to make. "I can't," she whispered, the words torn from her chest like living things. "I can't watch you leave me." Maya's hand found hers across the space between worlds, warm and solid, despite the ethereal glow emanating from her skin. "You're not watching me leave, Mom. You're watching me become." The lead Bone Dancer stepped closer, and Elena felt the ancient power radiating from its form, not malevolent, but utterly indifferent to human grief. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of countless transformations witnessed across millennia. "The choice requires sacrifice from both souls," it intoned, "the one who transforms and the one who bears witness. Your daughter offers her flesh to dance eternal. What do you offer?" Elena's breath caught. This wasn't just about Maya's decision. It was about Elena's willingness to sacrifice everything that had defined her existence. Her identity as protector, her role as the mother who could fix anything. Her desperate need to control outcomes through force of will and scientific understanding. "What happens to her body?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. Maya answered, her consciousness somehow existing simultaneously in her hospital bed and the ritual space surrounding them. "It finds peace." The machines stop fighting to hold something that's ready to fly. Elena felt the weight of 45 years of believing that love meant holding tight, that protection meant refusing to let go, that maternal devotion required fighting against any force that threatened to separate her from her child. Every instinct screamed against what Maya was asking of her. But underneath that screaming, in the deepest part of her heart, Elena recognized a different truth. Maya's spirit had been trying to show her this for months, through the trail camera footage, through the impossible moments of warmth and presence in the ICU, through every supernatural encounter that had led Elena deeper into the forest. Her daughter wasn't being stolen by malevolent forces. She was being offered a form of existence that transcended the limitations of her damaged brain. "If I say yes," Elena's voice cracked, "if I witness this choice without trying to stop it, what happens to us, to our connection?" The Bone Dancer's expression shifted, revealing something almost gentle beneath its fearsome exterior. "Flesh binds and flesh separates. Spirit touches spirit across all boundaries. The love between you becomes something the physical world cannot diminish." Elena looked at Maya's face, radiant with purpose, free from the confusion and limitation that had defined the months since her accident. Her daughter had found something in the space between worlds that Elena's desperate medical interventions could never provide: agency, wholeness, transcendence. The sacrifice demanded wasn't just Maya's life. It was Elena's entire understanding of what life meant. "I need you to promise me something," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "Promise me that wherever you go, whatever you become, some part of you will remember that you were loved completely." Maya's smile blazed with joy. "How could I forget? That love is what's giving me the courage to choose this transformation." Elena felt something break open in her chest, not shattering, but blooming. The desperate grip she had maintained on Maya's physical form dissolved, replaced by a connection that felt vast and unbreakable. She stepped back from the hospital bed, her hands shaking as she released her claim on her daughter's earthly existence. "Then I witness your choice," she whispered. "I honor your agency. I love you enough to let you become whatever you're meant to be." The moment Elena spoke those words, the room exploded into movement. The bone dancers began their ancient ceremony, their forms weaving patterns of transformation around Maya's bed. But Elena's attention remained fixed on her daughter's face, as Maya's consciousness fully separated from her damaged flesh. Maya's spirit rose from the hospital bed, luminous and free, her form more vivid than Elena had ever seen it. She turned back once, her expression blazing with gratitude and eternal love. "Thank you, Mom, for fighting so hard to keep me anchored while I learned what I needed to become. And thank you for loving me enough to let me fly." Elena felt Maya's presence touch her consciousness one final time. Not goodbye, but transformation of their connection into something that could exist across any distance, through any boundary between worlds. As the bone dancers completed their ceremony, Elena understood the true cost of victory. She had saved her daughter. By sacrificing her need to save her daughter, she had preserved their love by releasing her claim on its physical expression. Maya's body found peace as her spirit joined the eternal dance. Elena stood witness, her heart broken open and somehow impossibly complete. The monitors flatlined. In the sudden silence that followed, Elena stood frozen beside Maya's bed, watching the medical staff rush into the room. Their voices seemed to come from underwater as they worked with practiced efficiency, checking lines, adjusting equipment, preparing to initiate emergency protocols. But Elena saw everything through a strange, crystalline clarity that made their actions feel irrelevant, almost quaint. The body in the bed was peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. The tension that had held Maya's features in subtle distress was gone, leaving behind the serene expression of someone who had finally found rest after an impossibly long journey. "Dr. Vasquez?" The attending physician touched Elena's shoulder gently. "We need to discuss your daughter's code status. Do you want us to—" "No." Elena's voice was steady, surprising herself. "No more interventions. She's chosen." The doctor's brow furrowed with professional concern. "I understand this is overwhelming, but we have options. The monitors show cessation of brain activity, but we can maintain life support while you consider—" "She's not there anymore," Elena said quietly, never taking her eyes from Maya's face. "That's not my daughter. It's just the shell she left behind." Around her, the medical team exchanged glances that spoke of grief counselors and psychiatric evaluations. Elena understood their confusion. From their perspective, she was a mother in shock, making an incomprehensible decision in the aftermath of sudden loss. They couldn't see what she could see, the empty quality of the flesh that had once housed Maya's vibrant spirit, the sense of completion that hung in the room like morning mist. Dr. Chen arrived within minutes, his face grave with practiced sympathy. "Elena, I know this is devastating, but you don't have to make any decisions right now. We can give you time to—" "She's been trying to tell me for months," Elena interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "Through every impossible thing that happened in those woods, every moment when I felt her presence despite what the machine said, she was showing me that consciousness doesn't end when the body fails. It transforms." "Elena." Dr. Chen's tone carried the careful patience reserved for family members experiencing psychological breaks. Grief can make us see patterns that aren't there, find meaning in random events. What you experienced in the forest, the stress, the sleep deprivation, the trauma of watching Maya's condition. I know how it sounds. Elena finally turned from the bed to meet his eyes. I know exactly how insane this appears to everyone in this room. But Maya made her choice, and for the first time in 6 months I have the courage to honor it. The silence that followed was broken only by the mechanical sounds of the ventilator, now sustaining nothing more than cellular function. Elena felt the weight of months dissolving from her shoulders, the desperate vigils, the endless consultations, the crushing responsibility of making decisions for someone who could no longer speak for herself. Except Maya had been speaking. Through every supernatural encounter, every impossible moment of connection, her daughter had been trying to communicate something Elena was finally ready to hear. That love doesn't mean holding on. It means trusting the beloved to know their own path, even when that path leads beyond the boundaries of physical existence. I want to spend some time with her, Elena said, alone. Before you disconnect everything. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. Of course. Take all the time you need. As the medical staff filed out, Elena returned to the chair she had occupied for so many nights. But this time, she didn't reach for Maya's hand or search for signs of consciousness behind closed eyelids. Instead, she simply sat in the profound quiet, feeling the presence that had guided her through the forest settling around her like a familiar embrace. I understand now, she whispered to the still form on the bed. You weren't trapped, you were transitioning. And you needed me to stop fighting long enough to let the transformation complete itself. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital window, casting everything in golden light. Elena thought about the trail cameras still positioned throughout her research area, documenting the ordinary migrations of ordinary wolves. But she knew now that some movements couldn't be captured by technology. Some journeys required different kinds of witnessing. Her phone buzzed with a text from her research assistant, asking about the status of her project. Elena stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, taking an extended leave. The wolves are following paths I need time to understand. She would return to the forest eventually, but not as a scientist seeking to catalogue and control natural phenomena, as someone who had learned that the most profound mysteries require not observation but participation, not answers but trust. Elena settled back in her chair, keeping vigil over the shell Maya had left behind while her daughter danced free in realms beyond the reach of monitors and machines. For the first time in months, Elena felt complete peace. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the doorway of her Seattle home, keys heavy in her palm. The house felt like a museum of her former life, family photos on the mantel, Maya's hiking boots still by the front door, the remnants of an existence built around patterns that no longer applied. She moved through the room slowly, noting how the afternoon light fell differently than she remembered. Everything appeared smaller, more fragile, as if the walls couldn't quite contain the vastness she had learned to carry within herself. The trail map still covered her office desk, red pins marking wolf migration routes, but the data felt like artifacts from another century. Her phone rang. Dr. Chen, the third call she had ignored this week. The memorial service was tomorrow, and people expected her to perform grief in ways they could recognize and comfort. Elena understood their intentions, but how could she explain that Maya's death felt less like an ending than a graduation? That morning seemed inadequate for a transformation she had witnessed with her own eyes. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw James Martinez, her research partner, holding a casserole dish and wearing the careful expression of someone approaching a wild animal. Elena. His relief was visible when she opened the door. Christ, we've been worried sick. You disappeared completely after... He stopped, studying her face. You look different. She did. The mirror that morning had shown her someone she barely recognized, not aged by grief, but refined by it, like metal tempered in fire. Her eyes held a quality of attention that seemed to encompass more than the immediate surroundings, as if she were simultaneously present in her living room and aware of vast spaces beyond it. "I'm taking extended leave," she told James as he set the casserole on her counter. "Indefinitely. Elena, I know losing Maya was devastating. But isolation isn't. I'm not isolated." The words surprised them both with their certainty. "I'm more connected than I've ever been, just not in ways that translate easily to academic environments." James leaned against her kitchen counter, his concern evident. "The university is holding your position. When you're ready to return to normal life." "This is my normal life now." Elena touched the window, feeling the pulse of the forest 20 miles away, sensing the movement of creatures through underbrush she couldn't see. "I've learned things that can't be published in peer-reviewed journals. I've witnessed phenomena that would end my career if I tried to document them." Elena James's voice carried the gentle firmness of someone staging an intervention. "Trauma can create experiences that feel transcendent. The human mind protects itself from unbearable loss by constructing meaning from." "Maya chose to leave her body and join something eternal," Elena said quietly. "I witnessed her transformation. I gave my blessing to her decision, and now I live in a world where the boundaries between life and death are more permeable than I ever imagined possible." The silence that followed felt cavernous. Elena watched James process her words, seeing him reach the conclusion everyone would reach, that Maya's death had broken something fundamental in her psyche. She felt no need to convince him otherwise. The truth she carried was too vast for argument, too personal for proof. Maya existed now in the space between heartbeats, in the moment between sleeping and waking, in the forest light that sometimes held the echo of laughter. Their connection had become something that transcended flesh, something that medical science and wildlife biology couldn't measure or explain. "The memorial service," James began, "will be beautiful. People need to say goodbye to Maya's physical presence, and I honor that need. But I won't pretend I'm saying goodbye, because I'm not." Elena smiled, feeling Maya's approval like warmth against her skin. "I'm celebrating her transformation." After James left, Elena sat in Maya's bedroom, surrounded by the detritus of a interrupted young life. Textbooks, hiking gear, the acceptance letter from graduate school that would never be used. But underneath the surface sadness, she felt her daughter's presence like a steady flame. Tomorrow, she would endure the memorial service, accepting condolences from people who meant well but couldn't comprehend the joy that threaded through her grief. She would speak about Maya's love of nature, her fierce independence, her courage in the face of impossible choices. But tonight, she would return to the forest, not as a scientist documenting migration patterns, but as someone who had learned to read the deeper movements that connected all living things. She would sit among the trees where she had first glimpsed her daughter dancing, knowing that love could transform itself into something that death couldn't diminish. Elena packed her camping gear with steady hands, preparing for a journey that would take her beyond the reach of trail cameras and research protocols, into territories that required different kinds of courage to explore. The woman who had lost her daughter to medical tragedy was gone. In her place stood someone who had witnessed the impossible and learned to call it home, the new beginning. Elena drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the Cascade Mountains, her truck loaded with camping gear that felt different in her hands now, not the equipment of a researcher, but the tools of someone learning to live between worlds. The memorial service was 3 days behind her, a necessary ritual that had felt like watching actors perform a play about someone else's life. She had spoken the expected words about loss and remembrance, while feeling Maya's presence like sunlight on her shoulders, amused and warm. The forest welcomed her differently than it had during those desperate months of investigation. Where she had once fought through underbrush in frantic pursuit of impossible footage, now she moved with the patient rhythm of someone who understood that the most profound encounters couldn't be forced or scheduled. She made camp in the meadow where she had first seen Maya dancing, her tent positioned not to capture evidence, but to participate in whatever mysteries the full moon might reveal. On her second night, as October moonlight transformed the clearing into something luminous and otherworldly, Elena saw them, The bone dancers emerged from the tree line like thoughts becoming flesh, their massive forms moving with that impossible grace she remembered. But this time, Elena felt no fear, no desperate need to document or understand. She simply watched as Maya appeared among them, radiant and free, her spirit form more vivid than her physical body had ever been. Maya danced toward her mother with joy blazing in her translucent features. "You came back." "I live here now," Elena said, and realized it was true. Not in the tent or even the forest, but in this expanded understanding of what existence meant, what connection looked like when it transcended the boundaries of flesh and mortality. They talked through the night, not with words, but with the direct communication of consciousness touching consciousness. Maya showed Elena glimpses of her new existence, vast networks of awareness that connected every living thing, patterns of energy that danced through dimensions beyond human perception, forms of love that made earthly attachment seem like shadows of something immeasurably bright. "Are you happy?" Elena asked, though she could feel the answer radiating from her daughter's presence. "I'm whole," Maya replied. "For the first time since the accident, I'm completely myself. But Mom, you have to live too. Really live, not just exist in the spaces where we connect." As dawn approached, Elena understood what Maya meant. She had learned to perceive the eternal, but she was still anchored in the physical world, still responsible for how she chose to spend her remaining years. The question wasn't whether to return to her old life. That woman was gone forever. The question was what to build with the wisdom she had gained. Over the following weeks, Elena began crafting a new existence. She sold her Seattle house and bought a small cabin 40 minutes from the forest, close enough to visit Maya regularly but far enough to maintain the solitude she needed to process her transformation. She resigned from the university but began writing, not academic papers but something deeper, a book about consciousness and connection that would probably be dismissed as grief-induced fantasy by her former colleagues. She didn't care. The people who needed to read it would find it. Her relationship with James evolved into something unprecedented, friendship with someone who thought she had experienced a beautiful delusion. He visited monthly, bringing groceries and gentle concern, accepting that Elena had found peace in what he considered psychological reconstruction. She let him believe what he needed to believe, grateful for his steady presence even as she lived increasingly in realms he couldn't perceive. Maya visited whenever the moon was full, sometimes alone, sometimes dancing with the eternal beings who had become her companions. Elena learned to recognize the subtle signs of her daughter's presence during the daylight hours. The way morning light sometimes held echoes of laughter, how the wind through certain trees carried messages of love and encouragement. On Christmas morning, exactly a year after Maya's accident, Elena woke to find a gift that defied physical explanation, fresh flowers blooming in the snow outside her cabin, arranged in the pattern Maya had loved as a child. Elena touched the impossible blossoms with fingers that no longer questioned miracles. She had lost her daughter, and found something larger than motherhood. She had sacrificed her career, and discovered work that mattered more than professional recognition. She had released her need to control outcomes, and learned to trust the vast intelligence that moved through all things. That afternoon, Elena hiked to her favorite ridge overlooking the valley where Maya danced. She spread a blanket on the snow-covered ground and opened the thermos of hot chocolate she had packed, Maya's favorite, made with extra marshmallows out of pure celebration. As she sipped the sweet warmth and watched clouds move across the winter sky, Elena felt her daughter's presence settle beside her like an old friend joining a conversation already in progress. "Thank you," Maya whispered without words, "for loving me enough to let me become whatever I was meant to be." Elena smiled, her breath visible in the cold air, her heart vast enough to hold joy and loss simultaneously. "Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't end. It just learns new ways to dance."